Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are so happy to welcome you to our episode 9 of our AP US Skills webinar. These are being brought to you by the Bill of Rights Institute. And just a little bit about them. The Bill of Rights Institute has been around since 1999. It's a nonprofit educational organization, and their goal is to engage, educate, and empower people with a passion for the freedom and opportunity that exists in a free society. They develop educational resources and programs for teachers and students, and their whole goal with these webinars is to help you to be successful on the AP exam. My name is Nicole Moretti, and I work for the Bill of Rights Institute. And I also am a veteran classroom teacher, and I know the kind of stress you're starting to feel about this exam. So we've brought along Mr. Daniel Jocz to give you the good stuff. I'll bet many of you could relate to his story. He is the first of his family to go to college. And I'll bet you a lot of you out there are experiencing that and hoping for that. He is a national board certified teacher, and he was the 2016 California Teacher of the Year and one of 4 finalists for National Teacher of the Year. He has 2 beautiful children, and now he has chickens that he's raising. So we're going to turn it over to Mr. Jocz tonight, and we're going to talk about American wars to help you understand causation. Enjoy, everybody, and chat it up.
All right, good people on the internet. What's good? Buenos dias, buenos tardes, buenas noches, wherever you happen to be. I was tripping out because someone messaged me and said I was watching this from South Korea. And I'm like, dang, that is a whole nother time zone that I wasn't even thinking about. So some of you may be barely waking up here, but wherever you are, however you're watching, thank you so much for joining us. I can't believe it's episode number 9. We got one more. And if you're barely joining us, the good thing is these are all free. You can go back into the playlist. You could watch it. You can do it in 2x speed if you're short on time. You could watch it. You could slow it down if you want to really soak every word in. But hopefully this has been helpful for those of you that have been joining us. Today, our topic is a big one. And I chose it for a variety of reasons, which hopefully will make sense to you all as we go. But we're talking about the effects of American wars. And in particular, we're focusing in on the skill of causation. So causation is something we're going to look at. And so let's just kind of quickly look at what the College Board says about causation, which you can see it right here. It is one of the kind of big historical thinking skills that you'll be asked to do on the DBQ, on the LEQ, and frankly, in every part of the exam, there's going to be questions that assess the skill of causation. So just want to quickly remind you, on the most basic level, you can describe the causes and or effects. Today, I'm really going to kind of hone in on this part of it, which is the effects of a specific historical, in this case, war. Then another thing that you're going to need to be able to do is to explain the relationship between causes and effects. How does one lead to the other? And that oftentimes gets really complicated. And then this one is one of my favorites, is the difference between primary and secondary causes and between short and long-term effects. Every one of us probably knows the experience of kind of having a friendship, maybe a significant other, and maybe you break up, the friendship ends. Usually there's multiple reasons. There may be a primary reason, but there may be those secondary or even short-term reasons. So, what are the main causes? The secondary causes, what are the short-term and the long-term effects? So that's something it's really important that you're able to do. And then, the context. Every event has a story that preceded it. What is the context of a specific war? How did we get to this point beyond just the obvious causes? And then the significance of different causes and effects. Before I go any further, two things I would like you to do for me. One is in the chat, just let us know what city and state or country that you're watching from, just to kind of see where we are, what part of the US or the globe you happen to be in. The second thing is in the description, there is a graphic organizer Google Doc bad boy. And it's incomplete on purpose. And so before I go any further, I'm going to kind of explain just kind of the rationale behind it. And then hopefully it will be of some use to those of you that want to take this kind of topic and go a little bit further. So we got North Carolina. I'm assuming NC is North Carolina. Could be Northern California. Frisco, Texas. Frisco, Texas. There we go. So if you take a look, I just want to kind of explain the thought process behind this. New Jersey. And it's this. So what I've done is I've gone through the key concepts and I have extracted any mention of a war. And you'll notice there are some wars that were around Chicago, Chi-Town, cool. That were before we were a nation. And I decided, even though we're not going to go into any detail about them today, Metacom's War and King Philip's War, remember, against the New England colonies, that's a war you should be familiar with, especially since it is explicitly mentioned in the key concepts. You also have the Pueblo revolts, which in this case, we're not even talking about the English colonies, we're talking about Spanish colonization. Eventually, this region will be a part of the United States. That is explicitly mentioned in the key concepts. So those two you should be very aware of, and it shows native resistance to colonial settlement, whether it be amongst the British or amongst the Spanish. In most of these, you're going to notice that the cause and effect is blank, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is reviewing should be really you generating the knowledge at this point. You know, I can give you a Google Doc that has all the beautiful information in it, but is that going to stick? Is that going to really kind of be in your brain when you take the test? Chances are no. So my hope is you will kind of use this to kind of break down some of the big ideas that are in the key concepts. And the first war we're actually going to take a quick look at is the French and Indian War. For this one, I did provide some, not all, of the effects. This is also the causes you can put in there. And for some of them, I do have some resources about those particular moments. So some videos that may help. And then this middle section is really just what are things about the war that you think are important to know about. And the way you will know that is, like I said, any key concept that is related to the war that I have highlighted, in this case, the French and Indian War, right below it, you will find the key concepts that kind of either imply, infer the causes or the effects of that particular war. And we will be going through the American Revolution, the War of 1812. This one is the only one that we're going to be kind of on the graphic organizers that's not explicitly mentioned. So nowhere in the key concepts does it say the War of 1812, but if you look at some of these things, you will notice it is kind of implied, okay? So that's there for you. Hopefully it's useful. And let me kind of dive into the big part of today's topic, all right? So, war. If you were in person, we would all say, war, what is it good for? That old song by Edwin Starr. War has been a fact of America's existence and many nations' existence since its founding. And if you look at this graphic right here, the most obvious effect of war, or the most obvious effect a war can have, is on the people whose lives are lost or injured or forever altered because of the psychological trauma or because of death. And just to kind of give you a visual, and the number that I would say is probably not accurate, because the global war on terror, which includes the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, are still ongoing, much scaled down. But throughout our history, we have had numerous moments where we were involved in wars. No, sorry, I don't have the Fallout reference. I tried playing that game once, Fallout, and I loved it. But then I was told I'm spending too much time on video games. You know, growing up, y'all, it's rough. And they shamed me because you can get lost in Fallout. And so I stopped playing it. But I wish I could jump back in. And so if you take a look, by far, our deadliest war is without a doubt the Civil War, easily. The most obvious impact is on the lives of the men and women who were either fighting in combat, supporting combat, taking care of the home front. And that's kind of some of what we're going to be thinking about today is what effects do wars have? The other thing is to keep in mind is duration. You know, this particular chart looks at the length of time that various wars took place. And probably the one that most of you are familiar with is, in terms of kind of being short, sweet, and having a big impact, is of course going to be the Spanish-American War, or what was referred to at the time, the Splendid Little War. Other wars, and maybe you haven't quite gotten here, the Vietnam War, up until recently, will be America's longest war. But even that is kind of interesting because what makes a war a war? And I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a few moments. So we have fought in various wars of various lengths. There's this meme I've seen on the internet where it's like this kind of like bro dude. He has his hat all to the side and it says, you know, America always shows up late to the World War party. And, you know, remember in both World War II and World War I, we attempted to maintain neutrality. So even though both these wars lasted longer than this indicates, we will fight in both of those major wars in the 20th century. Like I said, this stuff gets complicated. I feel like I use that word so often in APUSH because that's the world we live in. It's super complicated. So let me give you an example of this. The Spanish-American War, take a look right there, 2,446 deaths during the war. What this graphic does not reveal, does anyone know anything about the Spanish-American War that makes it, I think, even more fascinating? Because it's not just a war between the United States and Spain. Where else does the war, let's see in the chat who remembers, where else does America end up fighting during this war that takes place between Spain and America? We got Cuba, but the number one place in which where Americans are going to die are not because of the war against Spain. Who was the fight against? Does anyone remember? I'll give you a moment. I'll send you like Pixie extra credit, like her. Is that what that little Tinkerbell lady does? Is Pixie does? Like I'll throw you extra credit your way if you can tell me what we're talking about here. What does the United States fight during? Actually, not during, but after. Well, during, but then after. Who do we fight? Not Mexico. Good guess. Further away from the United States. After the Spanish-American War, we acquired the territory of Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Yes, there you go in the chat, the Philippines. And so if you take a look, and I found this graphic on the internet on the right, you will notice that there's a bunch of wars that maybe you don't really think about in terms of magnitude or in terms of just even being well, they're not declared wars. So take a look right here. After the Spanish-American War, there is a brutal war between the United States and the Philippines, known as the US or the American-Filipino War. And that war, unlike the Spanish War, which will last for only 4 months, this war is going to last for 3 years. And so the majority of the deaths you see on the Spanish-American War graphic are actually American deaths from the fight, not against Spain, but against the Philippines. And a lot more Filipino people will be losing their life during that time. So take a look. You may remember some of these things. We oftentimes don't include the Indian Wars. Every time there is an attack on the frontier, or a war or a battle or a massacre. Remember, different languages used. There's the quasi-war with France, not really a declared war, but an undeclared naval war just in our early part of our history. You may even remember the Barbary Wars against the pirates. These ones usually people know, Spanish-American War. Maybe you don't remember, or we involved ourselves. I wouldn't call this one a war, but we would intervene in Hawaii. There's a coup. Queen Liliuokalani is overthrown from power. The Samoan Civil War, to be truthful, I don't even know much about that. The Boxer Rebellion, American troops fought in China. And if you go down the list, there are numerous examples of wars that were much smaller than the declared wars we oftentimes learn about, but yet you probably learned about them, and they have played a significant role in our history, and importantly, the history of those places that were oftentimes American troops were sent. I mean, just even take a look at this graphic from 1898 to 1920. This looks at US intervention. And to be clear, this does not mean war in every instance. And more often than not, it's not war, but American soldiers were in all these different countries: Cuba, Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, just in this 20-ish year span. Not necessarily war, but US troops abroad. I tell you all that for a particular purpose. When you are studying, one of the things your book is going to do, no matter what book you use, they're going to give you a lot of numbers and battles. And they're interesting for a lot of people. But in terms of your studying for APUSH, did you know the deadliest battle in US history took place during World War I? The deadliest battle of the Civil War was Gettysburg. These types of things typically are not what we talk about when we talk about the effects of war. So don't spend a bunch of time trying to memorize or know every battle of every war, every campaign. When we're talking about effects and also causes, we're talking about something different. And this is really important because a lot of students make a big mistake when it comes to kind of connecting the dots across the big picture. When you're ready to hit start on your APUSH exam, chances are the College Board questions, typically, if you had to complete that sentence, I'm curious, College Board questions typically are blank. What would you say? How would you describe the College Board questions? Because you're not going to get a question that says, what was the cause of World War I? You're not going to get a question that says, what was the effect of the Spanish-American War? I can promise you it will not be that easy. And the way I would actually complete that sentence is a very simple. College Board questions typically are not easy. So you're not going to get what was the cause of the American Revolution? What was the effect of World War II? Okay. And I love it. You guys are seasoned veterans of this APUSH game. College Board questions are tricks, are challenging, are confusing, worded in a way to confuse you, painful, broad. I asked this same question on another session I was with a couple weeks ago, and people said that they are the spawn of Satan. And I was like, damn, okay, calm down. Let's time out here for a moment. They are difficult. And whether or not you think they're misleading or challenging, you know, it's really open to interpretation. So let me kind of give you some clarity about what we mean by the effects of American wars. And then we're going to do some practice that'll hopefully help you out. So the first thing to keep in mind is when we're talking about the idea of effects of war, one learning objective, you will notice in the key concept is really kind of a theme, is looking at America's role in the world. And if you take a look at the framework, which is why I included all those different graphic organizers, is the key concepts. One of the big kind of overarching themes is how has America's role in the world evolved over time? What has stayed the same? What has changed? What is America's role in the world? And, I would argue the more interesting part, and the reason why I like teaching history, not necessarily APUSH, is what should be America's role in the world? What leadership role, if any, should we play on international affairs? So if you take a look, you will notice there's some learning objectives on this slide. Explain the similarities and differences in attitudes about the nation's proper role in the world. So what have been the debates when it comes to our role? And so that's something to think about when you're studying for this particular time period. Reminder in the description, we have the graphic organizer that has the key concepts. Once again, we study that because that's the language you're expected to be knowledgeable about. So let me give you an example of the type of question. And this one is also on the graphic organizer in the Google Doc. This is one that was a College Board question not too long ago, and it is kind of difficult. Evaluate, and I hate this wording, but this one, there's a lot of these questions, so please make sure you know what this means. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the expanding role of the U.S. in the world in the period from 1865 to 1910. Can someone in the chat tell me what the heck does evaluate the relative importance even mean? Because I don't know about you, I don't think I've ever said those words until they started using that particular prompt. What does this question ask us? Evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the expanding role of the U.S. in the world in the period from 1865 to 1910. What does that phrasing mean? If you're thinking about it in terms of APUSH, evaluate the relative importance. Just while you're kind of the impact. All right. Thank you, Kate. What else does it mean in your guys' minds? Remember the Spanish-American War, which begins in 1898, is really kind of America's overseas empire, our coming out party. I make the really cringy joke about McKinley is like Mr. Worldwide before Pitbull was. Uncle Sam's getting bigger and expanding very rapidly. This question's asking you kind of what were the different factors and what, yes, Scotchy is kind of spot on. What were the important, like kind of ranking? What are the most important causes that led America to an expanding role? Was it military? Was it ideological? Was it economic motives? Was it political motives? So what's the importance of the causes? Like, why does this take place? And it requires you to kind of assign some kind of degree. This was primarily because of, and take a position. So I show you this not because we're going to work on this prompt today, but I want you to see it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be, what's the effect of the Spanish-American War? It rarely is. Every now and again, you get an easy question, but it'll be something that requires some really intense critical thinking. And since a lot of you are going to be taking the exam digitally, online, maybe even from home, they have, in many ways, in my opinion, made these things ungoogleable. It's not something you can easily Google. And so it's led to prompts that are very complex because they're worried about academic integrity. What if everyone on the New York East Coast starts texting on Twitter the prompts? That creates a security issue. So oftentimes these questions are more complicated for those reasons. Here's another example. This one I think is way easier, but this is another example of the type of question when we talk about effects. Evaluate the extent to which U.S. participation in the First World War marked a turning point in the nation's role in world affairs. So if you take a look, this one has that kind of evaluate the relative importance. This one's evaluate the extent. So this one's kind of really kind of looking at continuity and change over time. Once again, we're not going to look at this particular prompt today, but I want you to think about the skill that this requires you to demonstrate. How did World War I and America's participation in it change our role when the war was over? And so that requires you to be able to write about the effects. So those are some examples of types of questions that you might see when it comes to the effect of war. But here's probably the most important thing I'm going to say about war today. And it's the thing a lot of students that I've worked with are surprised by. The most common type of questions about war are actually about the impact on the home front. There's no place like home. More often than not, especially more recently, when you are studying, reviewing wars in American history, oftentimes what is going to be asked is either America's role in the world and why we did what we did when we did what we did, or how that war and the experience of the war impacted some aspect of the home front. And so a lot of students kind of ignore that piece. We're so kind of like used to war, battlefields, trenches, guns, bombs, tanks, all that stuff. The flip side is what happens internally in a country. So let me show you two examples before we dive deeply into a couple of examples that'll hopefully help you out. So these are three samples. All three of these require you to know about some aspect of a war and how it had a ripple effect, how it had an impact on some part of American society. And I like these three questions because they're all very different. So look at sample one. Explain why and how the role of the federal government changed as a result of the Civil War with respect to two of the following during the period 1861, the start of the Civil War, 1877, the end of Reconstruction we learned about last week. And you get to pick two: race relations, economic development, westward expansion. That's a tough question if you have to do it without any kind of ability to really think for a moment. But you might write about how the South left the Union. This allowed Republicans in Congress to pass a series of laws, the Pacific Railroad Act, the Homestead Act. The war, eventually led to new amendments being passed. 13th Amendment is the most obvious one, but the 14th and 15th come out of the Civil War. This requires you to understand the Civil War context, but also how it kind of played out in two of these three areas. Not an easy question, but something that is in the framework. And if you look at the framework, you will be able to provide some kind of understanding of what this looks like. Here's another one. This one's very broad. It doesn't even mention war, but you can make a very good argument that it is World War II that really kind of plays a key role during this period. Explain the causes of the rise of a women's rights movement in the period 1940 to 1975. Once again, challenging. You probably, most of us, don't have any idea what the hell's going on in 1940. But like I've been saying, if you know certain dates, Pearl Harbor, 1941. Okay, cool. This is just before America gets in the war. I don't know what the heck happened in 1975 right offhand, 4 years before I was born. But if you know certain dates, World War II plays a role in this question. And think about, what do you remember about the experiences of women during the war? Maybe you remember Rosie the Riveter, millions of women entering the workforce. There's these kind of expectations they're developing. Then when the war is over, there's an expectation that they go back into the domestic sphere. Then you have the 50s and the kind of, celebration of the suburbs. There's a baby boom. How do women's lives, how are they impacted by the war? And does it transform the lives of women? And what are the causes for women once again, placing more demands on American society. So this requires you to know some stuff about World War II to really answer the question. And I bet you if this was a DBQ, you would have some documents that kind of give you a little sense of the experiences of women during that war. Okay. Right to vote was in 1919, so this would be after the fact. But yeah, women are definitely taking jobs during World War II, as they did during World War I, but there's going to be some differences as well. This one's one of those big ones that require you to just kind of, you get to pick where you go with this question, but analyze the ways in which the Vietnam War heightened social, political, and economic tensions in the US. So it's talking about the impact of the Vietnam War on internal social, political, or economic issues. And once again, dates are on there. So 1964, you may not really know much, but if you know Gulf of Tonkin, that's the start of US escalation, boots on the ground. And if you know 1975, that's the part when North Vietnam takes over South Vietnam and the war is effectively over. We got out of it before then. And so this requires you to know maybe the anti-war movement, the peace, Doves versus Hawks, the protest on college campuses, Kent State, Jackson State. So what are the things you want to focus on? You know, the belief that the government's lying, the Gulf of Tonkin, you know, the other scandals, My Lai massacre. Wherever you go with this question, it requires you to understand how did the Vietnam War impact these areas. Now, and this is just skills, not going to go over every single war in American history. The chart gives you the big ideas you're supposed to know about each of the wars that are mentioned. Let's go ahead and practice a little bit with this type of idea, the impact of war on the home front. So y'all ready to do a little practice session with this? We're going to kind of show how this could possibly come up in real life. So here is our first practice session question for today. And it's a doozy. There's a lot here, and it's in the spirit of looking at the experiences of women. So the prompt reads, discuss the changing ideals of American womanhood between the American Revolution, 1770s, and the outbreak of the Civil War. So I picked this question because it's actually using two wars to bookend the experiences of women, but in particular, the changing ideals of American womanhood. So the ideals of American womanhood from the American Revolution to the outbreak of the Civil War. This is a beast of a question, because chances are you're going to go, what in the hell do I write about? Calm down. It'll be okay. There's a second sentence. What factors fostered the emergence of Republican motherhood and the cult of the domesticity? So, changing ideals of American womanhood, the American Revolution, up until the Civil War, what factors led to the emergence of Republican motherhood and the cult of the domesticity? And then there's another part to this question. Assess the extent to which these ideals influence the lives of women during this period. And then there's another part. In your answer, be sure to consider issue of race and class. Woo! I'm gonna be straight up with you all. I never had a question with that many layers to it, and I went to damn college twice. I studied history for 4 of those years. There's so much to unpack here. The good news is this happened to be a DBQ. And the reason why that's a good thing is think of the documents as your roadmaps as to where you might want to take this essay. So if you take a look at it, changing ideals of American womanhood, what led to Republican motherhood and the cult of the domesticity, what factors, and then these ideals, to what extent did it actually influence the lives? Because it's one thing to have an idea about something. It's another thing to actually see it in practice. Does it impact, Mary Beth over in Kentucky, or, Juanita in Boston during the period? Okay. And then it's asking you to think about race and class. Does this apply to low-income women, middle-class women, upper-class women, Black women, women of color, white women, Puritan women? Who are we talking about here? So there's a lot of layers to this. The thing I want you to keep in mind is, notice, this is a question that's asking you to think about the effects of war, but in a way no human being has ever really thought about it, let alone a 15, 16, or 17-year-old. I see Joe scored this DBQ. I need to buy you a tall glass of water to celebrate you sitting through all of those essays. I can imagine the madness that you read when you saw students' prompts. Yeah, this is intense. Now, we could spend all day complaining, which I oftentimes do, but the good thing is a lot of the people who take APUSH are not exactly entirely prepared because of oftentimes their own fault or other factors. And so all you need to do is put pen to paper and start just trying the best you can. You don't need to have a one-sentence thesis that is just beautifully written. You want to try to answer this damn prompt in a way that demonstrates you understand what this question's asking. So let me show you a little bit deeper. And if you're wondering, why in the hell am I starting with this question? I don't want this to throw you off your game. If you're taking the exam and this is what you open up and see on a DBQ, if you've never seen something like this and it's the first time you've seen it, you're probably going to duck underneath your bed if you're at home, or start crying and then go use the restroom. You got to take it step by step. So let me show you what to do with this type of thing. So over here is the document. This is the document that was included. I want to show you kind of, once again, thinking about evidence and documents, which we've kind of touched on a few times before. And so take a look. Document A, and I hate doing this, but I'm going to read it to you because, follow along. It's a letter written by a Philadelphia woman, 1776. So when you're sourcing a document, right, you see 1776, maybe that clues you in. Okay, that's the American Revolution. I do know that because I eat hot dogs and shoot off illegal fireworks on July 4th, 1776. It's illegal where I'm from, maybe not where you're from. It's from a woman. We don't know who she is, but it is at the early stages of the American Revolution. Okay, so you want to kind of look. Maybe this clues you in. It tells me a little bit. At least I know it's American Revolution time. I will tell you what I've done. I have retrenched every superfluous expense in my table and family. Tea I have not drunk since last Christmas, nor bought a new cap or gown. I have learned to knit, and I'm now making stockings of American wool for my servants. Oh, she ballin'. That's an odd flex. That's what we call an 18th century flex. I make stockings for my servants. In this way do I throw in my mite to the public good. I know this, that as free as I can die but once, but as a slave I shall not be worthy of life. Okay. Now, if you're a normal human being, you're reading this and 6 other documents, and you still got 15 minutes to try to do all that and then start writing. Don't worry about getting every little word, the meaning of it, and understanding it as an entirety. If you are a struggling reader or writer, chances are you're going to get mixed up. Maybe you don't know what a stocking is. Maybe you don't know what servants are because you're not balling like that. But if I was to read this, these are some things that I could take away from that. I can infer these things, and they may not all be relevant for this question, but some of them are. This demonstrates the role women played in resistance to British policies. Nowhere in here does it say TEAC or non-consumption agreements, but maybe, just maybe, fingers crossed, toes crossed, when you read that, you may be thinking about, okay, she's resisting why she's not drinking tea and why she's knitting her own socks with American wool is because the colonies are not buying it from Mama England anymore. So maybe you don't know the Tea Act or the non-consumption agreement, but it shows that this woman in Philadelphia is playing a role in resistance to the British. The refusal to buy British goods, the non-importation agreements, the non-consumption agreements. I always get those two mixed up, but this idea that we're going to not bring in any British goods, we're not going to consume any British goods, mentions indirectly revolutionary ideals, natural rights. It does? Well, she's talking about freedom and life and slave, like she's very much kind of alluding to these revolutionary ideas of being denied something that is fundamental to your person, which is your natural rights. Now, I may not have known natural rights. I may have only known that this is a woman who is resisting something. And as I go through the other documents, I may start kind of remembering things. That's the beautiful thing about the DBQ. As much as I hate to grade them, for students, if you're drawing a blank, the documents may be your guide. And so let me show you how you might, and I'm not going to get into in this particular session, like thesis writing, because we got an hour. But let's just imagine I start writing a body paragraph with these kind of understandings. This is what I take away from it. Remember, you're not writing an essay about the document. You're not going to describe it. But you may say, and I know a lot of teachers don't like it when students say, as stated in document 1. So you may be fancy and say, the Philadelphia woman in 1776 claims. Like, it doesn't matter how you cite your document. You're not going to lose points. You're not going to get points because of your citations. But let's just say you want to use document 1. That's the only document you have, and you want to start to address this question. As stated in document 1, both prior to and during the American Revolution, women played an increased role in the public sphere by participating in resistance to British policies. I'm making a claim based upon my interpretation of the document. The claim is women are playing an active role in resisting the British, and they're doing so in a public way. In not purchasing, in making their own goods, this is what this is showing me. Since women were seen as the guardians of the home through organizations such as, I'm bringing in some outside information, and I should clarify, I'm not doing it. This is from one of my students. I just kind of copied and pasted because I don't want to give you what 41-year-old Mr. Jocz is going to write, because it probably won't be this fancy. But this is what a student wrote. The Daughters of Liberty, women often led boycotts of British products and even organized spinning bees, more outside information, to express opposition to British policies and to support the colonial war effort. This is what this particular student, I forget if it was a guy or a girl, whoever it was, wrote in terms of using that document to answer this question. We're not going to worry about what their thesis is, but you can kind of see where their thesis perhaps might have taken them. They're showing that they understand women are taking a more public role. They're resisting the British. Why are they resisting the British? Because the American Revolution is going on. There still is this expectation of women's roles are amongst the home. They're creating political organizations, and they're boycotting. Spinning bees are those things where women would oftentimes kind of like make certain goods, mittens or whatever, pants, whatever textiles, to demonstrate that they were not buying British goods. Because remember, at this time, colonial manufacturing was relatively weak. Okay. Student got a 5 for sure. I wish I knew who it was. A lot of my students get 4s and 5s, and it's not because of me. It's because every now and again I give some decent advice and they take it. So chances are they did pretty well. Not always though. So that's just this document. Now here's the thing. You're not going to get an essay with one document, nor are you going to get a question that's going to be, what is the effect of? It's just not happening. So let's just imagine that we have another document. Same question, American Revolution, all that stuff. So here's document B in this packet. Joe, and I apologize if I'm giving you like painful memories of that hot summer you graded these things in San Antonio. At least San Antonio is a cool city. Source B, Source, Benjamin Rush. Anyone know who he is? Because you may know who he is. Sometimes that can help. You may not know. I'm just going to pretend like I don't know who he is. He's a guy with a cool name, Rush. That's pretty cool. Thoughts upon female education. Okay, so a dude named Benjamin, I'm assuming it's a dude. Sorry for assuming your gender. Benjamin Rush, he's not. Or wait, what did I say? Benjamin Rush is a guy, famous. Thoughts upon female education. So it's a guy giving his views about female education, 1787. You probably, most normal people, that means nothing to you, but that is the Constitutional Convention period. That's the point where they've undone the articles and now the Constitution's rocking. And so that's why, if you remember, I linked on one of the other sessions a timeline of dates. If you know them, it will help you, because when you get a document, you can put it in its proper context. If you think 1787 is Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase, this document's going to read differently than if you know that they've now just created, or in the process of creating, a constitution. So take a look. The equal share that every citizen has in the liberty and the possible share he may have in the government of our country, a lot of male pronouns, make it necessary that our ladies should be qualified to a certain degree by a peculiar and suitable education to concur in instructing their sons in the principles of liberty and government. Okay. Now, if you're like me, you get to the end and you're like, I don't know what I just read. Well, remember, you don't got to know everything. If I'm quickly jotting ideas down, and you don't have the luxury of writing all this down, but when I'm done reading this, there's some things that I'm starting to think about, and they include this. It reflects a belief that women have a role to play in the new republic. New republic? Well, yeah, it's the Constitution. Okay, they're creating a representative government. Women are in the unique position, I think he even uses those words, to train their sons in the principles of liberty and government. Oh yeah, that's that Republican motherhood stuff. This idea that women, because they're the caretakers of the home, they're going to be the ones to kind of teach their little Joeys and Billies and Johns and other, white 18th century, 17th century names. They're the ones who are going to do it. And women must be allowed some education to ensure the health of the young republic. That's what I'm kind of getting. You can probably get some other ideas from this, but by and large, this is kind of really addressing the fact that they've created a new government, the Constitution, a new form of government, a Republican form, and they're thinking about thoughts upon female education, what the role of women should be in this new republic. So take a look. Maybe you continue your essay. This is kind of what I just mentioned. Following the colonial victory in the American Revolution, there were changes to the ideals of womanhood. Oh, look at that. That's kind of what the question's asking, or at least part of it. As stated in document 2, once again, there's fancier ways for referencing the documents, especially if you want to be a great writer, which the College Board, in my opinion, does not value. It's just get it on paper. With the creation of a new republic based upon Enlightenment principles, that's outside information. This student is bringing that in. It doesn't say that, but they're bringing it in. That could be context for hipping the document, or that could be outside information. Let the rubric person, grader, decide. Educating women became important to ensure that women could train their sons to be good citizens. This idea of Republican motherhood was a direct result of the American Revolution. So right there, they're kind of addressing what the prompt's asking. Nevertheless, women were still expected to largely confine themselves to affairs of the home, and the lives of women were not fundamentally changed. Oh, because look at what it says. Assess the extent to which these ideals influenced the lives of women during this period. So they are really showing you the kind of complexity of the experiences of women. Yes, women's lives changed because Benjamin Rush and others wanted them to educate their sons, and they had this new role to play in this new republic, but ultimately it was still a role that was delegated to the home. And so was your life suddenly now completely changed? Not really. Now, if we were to kind of do this whole essay and take a look, this is two documents. This is the first kind of part I showed you, and this is the second part. This is how you integrate the documents into your essay. Some students, even in April and whatever date this is, still think each paragraph is going to be a document. No, you want to group the documents. It just so happens for this particular prompt, document 1 and 2 go really nicely with one another. They both are kind of showing similar things. Women are playing a role in a more public space, resisting the British during the Revolution. Women are going to extend that role into this new realm of Republican motherhood because they create a republic. And women's lives, though, are still not fundamentally radically changed. Now, they haven't even gotten into, and I think if memory serves me, which it oftentimes doesn't, I don't even think they even tackled this last part of race and class, because that's a whole other, in my opinion, that's a whole other essay. You know, were Republican motherhood values expected amongst Black women who were forced into slavery? No. In fact, it was illegal for them to be able to read or write. What about for the Irish immigrants who start coming in huge numbers? A couple of weeks ago or last week, we talked about nativism. You know, the Irish women who were coming in, working in the factories of the market revolution. What were their experiences like? Probably quite different. So if you get a question that is this packed with stuff, think about what the rubric's asking you to do and just do that. And make sure that you use enough documents to get enough of those points, you bring in some outside information, and you at least take a stab at dealing with all 14 parts of this question. If you do those things, you're going to do a lot better than most students will do on the AP exam. I got one more for you to show you this idea of the effects of war. And that takes a look at the short answer question. So here's a little shortness in action. Have any of you done these type of SAQs? I know that my own students have not done a whole lot of them because we have like about a little over 2 hours to meet each week. And so we're way behind. But as just in the chat, if you can let me know how you feel about these ones where you get two different sources. They're secondary sources. They're usually like, I almost think of them as like historians battling each other. So you'll have two different historians, secondary sources written way after the fact, interpreting the same historical event from different lenses. Kate, you're a fan? Okay. Yeah, usually they're pretty easy if you know the basics of the history, because even if you don't know a lot of the history, you can get enough of the points to do okay on them. If you're a bad reader, they're hard because it's very academic language, or it's very, if it's a primary source, it could be old school language that we're not used to seeing. So it's kind of like historians battling. Okay, so some of you are liking them. Okay, well, you're going to get one of those on the exam. There is, I forget what the format is this year. It changes, but they're almost always, if not always, you'll have this. So take a look at this particular one with the time we have left. And you could screenshot it. I did not put this on the Google Doc. I don't believe I did. So if you want to kind of test this out in its entirety. So take a look. We have two historians kind of talking. I have no idea who this person is. I have no idea who this book is. But they're writing a book about the New England region, 1630 to 1800. It's published in 1998. None of that really helps me, but I do know this was a topic with regard to the New England region at that. Rando's like, I hate these. I'm kind of with you on that. I don't know. it doesn't get me too juiced up on a history exam. If I'm 16, it's just not the most interesting. Some of them are good. Some of them are good. If there's like these like radically different interpretations, but sometimes it's like super lame, the differences. So I guess it all depends on what the sources are. This one is another historian. I have no idea who this person is. Revolutionary Backlash, Women in Politics in the Early American Republic. Okay, it's 2007. All right. More often than not, that's not going to give you a whole bunch of clues, but sometimes you can get some. So it's two different historians talking about women in early American history, including the colonial period, as well as the early republic. Part A is typically to describe one major difference between these two historians. And notice what it says here. This is why I included it. Interpretations of the immediate impact of the American Revolution on women. Okay. Let me go back to this particular graphic organizer I gave you. This would be very similar to, and I put, just in case you're wondering, like the stuff in red is kind of College Board questions that are publicly released that you can kind of think about. So take a look at this. You may have something like this about World War II. Maybe there's two historians talking about the experiences of Japanese Americans. And one of them may be arguing the Japanese internment was primarily because of racial prejudice, anti-Asian sentiment in the West Coast. Another person may be arguing it's because of economics and a desire to take away property from these individuals. Who knows? The important thing is that you are able to kind of extract what is different. Usually the A is what is different between these two historians about this particular historic event. Okay? Because of time, I'm not going to read this to you because not really into that, but that's kind of the other way they may ask you the effect of a particular moment in history. So be on the lookout for responding. And the beautiful thing about these is because A is usually kind of what's different between the two. And then B, and I didn't format this correctly. So this is B, briefly explain how one, and this is where you get a lot of choice. And so I do like that it's not one thing you have to know. Briefly explain how one event, development, or circumstance from the period 1765 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts could be used to support Crane's argument. And so the beautiful thing about this is you would then kind of take a look at what is Elaine Crane arguing. And she's saying the revolutionary moment was neither radical nor a watershed for American women. In other words, it did not change their lives completely. Those who disregard America's commitment to patriarchal rule and plead for a historical interpretation that favors enlightened exceptionalism have overlooked the conditions that made large-scale change all but impossible at that time and place. In other words, what she is saying is the American Revolution did not exactly open up tremendous opportunity and change for American women. In spite of all our 4th of Julying and hot dog eating and fireworks shooting, women's lives were not completely revolutionized. So what you would do for part B is you would say, what is one thing I know about American history in 1765 to 1800 that proves that this revolution did not have a radical change on the lives of women? And there's so many different examples you can use. The fact that voting rights were not extended either at the new state constitutions, except for New Jersey for just a brief period. The Treaty of Paris, I'm wondering, like, what do you mean by that, Rando? Because once again, the example has to reinforce what Crane is saying. So you could say women were not involved in the creation of the new republic. They were not involved in the Constitutional Convention. Although Republican motherhood was a change, it still was built upon this stereotype of women being guardians of the home. There were a lack of public spaces for women to engage with. There's a lot of different examples, but as long as you're kind of proving what she's saying and it's not mentioned in it, you're good and you would get a point. And for Malik, I don't know if you have, but on my sheet of resources, I do have a SAQ kind of explanation video where I kind of explain, here's what you can do. Here's kind of the strategy for the SAQ, because no matter what type of SAQ it is, the strategy is pretty much the same. So I could put that in there if you don't have that link as well. Typically C would be, and it is, I just didn't copy paste it. What is Rosemary's, what is one event or development that explains Rosemary's interpretation? And once again, you would be able to do that as well. So in short, when we're thinking about effects of war, we have to think beyond just kind of the simple. And the first step in that is, and let me just kind of scroll back up. I know we're a little bit late, so thank you for sticking with me here. Is if we scroll back up and we look at the American Revolution, you will see that they talk about some of these things in the key concepts. What are the ways? Commitment to Republican values. That requires you to know what is a Republican value. When we think about the American Revolution, what are the different things that they do? They do create a government with limited power and eventually a stronger national government. But what does that mean? It says many state constitutions place power in the hands of the legislative branch and maintain property qualifications for voting and citizenship. Well, think about who's not voting. What are the qualifications? Well, very often it was being a dude and owning land. That's going to change over time, but it's not going to change for American women until the 19th Amendment, which is exactly what our topic is tomorrow. It is the expansion of democratic rights. And I hope to see you back here as we take a look at the right to vote in American history.
Awesome. We hope you come back tomorrow. I just wanted to mention that I dropped in 2 links for you. Daniel mentioned bringing in outside information. And this is a way that you can kind of jog your memory. The Bill of Rights homework help video series, those are from 1 minute to 7 minutes long is all, on all kinds of topics that you can go watch these videos and just jog your memory. Also, I dropped in the link to the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness textbook, so you can go in and kind of get a feel for that and look at it. And remember, this is the last week to be able to enter the essay contest for the Bill of Rights Institute. So jump on there and get that done. You guys text that much. The amount of words that are required for that essay, you guys can do this. Get on and enter that. We hope to see you tomorrow. We hope you found something interesting tonight. Bring your friends and come back. Tomorrow's our last night. Have a good evening, everyone.